Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome to my channel. I haven't been posting for a while because my thesis has taken over my life. I'm sorry for being absent from comments and social media, but I promise I will get to these as soon as I can. I've submitted the first draft of my thesis, so I now have some time to sort of catch up on the YouTube. Just a disclaimer, welcome to Canadian summer, where weather and sunlight are subject to change. Unprofessional lighting aside, let us get into my June wrap-up, because I am going back to June to share some of the things that I read there. So I started off reading Delusions of Gender by Cordelia, which is a piece of nonfiction that I read for my book club. This I did not enjoy because it basically takes what feminism has been saying for years, that gender is a social construct, and uses bad science and good science to prove it true. The chapters in here are very repetitive. The message of the book and of every single chapter is that gender is a social construct. So if you want to be beaten over the head with that message and hear some semi-questionable science on that, go for it. A much more enjoyable read was The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. So this is a piece of YA fantasy. It's urban fantasy. It centers around this girl named Blue who runs into a group of boys, the Raven Boys, who go to this elitist private all-boys school. One of the boys is looking for this dead king along a ley line, and magic and shit ensues. I really enjoyed the plot. I enjoyed the ideas. I found the narrative voices difficult to distinguish between. There are a bunch of different characters, and each chapter kind of flips back and forth between their perspectives, but the narrative voice doesn't change. I think it's a beautiful narrative voice. Stiefvater, as an author, has a great voice. The language, the imagery, the cadence. I loved the literary references that she brings in. The novel opens with a couple of poems on ravens, and so that turned on my little English major brain and got me really interested in seeing how these themes in the opening quotations set and interact with Stiefvater's story. So I think there's a lot going on here. I almost would have preferred an omniscient narrator opposed to a narrator that seems to be located in a character that doesn't have distinct enough voices. Except for the indistinguishable narrative perspectives, I think this is fairly quality writing in YA, and I think the plotline is interesting enough. So obviously, because I enjoyed The Raven Boys, I also picked up Dream Thieves. This is the continuation of the Raven Boys cycle. So this is part 2. Again, more adventures, more character development. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil it, because I feel like a lot of the charm for this series is really about getting to know the characters and seeing the boys in blue interact and develop a friendship. The one thing that I will say about the two is that I really love the women of 300 Foxway, and I wish we had more of them. I enjoyed this as well. Then I read End of Watch by Stephen King, which is the third and final installment in the Bill Hodges trilogy. I have reviews for Mr. Mercedes and Finders Keepers, and I am planning on doing a review for End of Watch as well. This picks up with Brady Hartfield, who has developed psychic powers and is trying to convince people to commit suicide with his newfound psychic powers. That is not a spoiler, that's on the dust jacket of the book. Bill Hodges has to use his real-world criminal skills to try and deal with magic. Didn't love this. Then I read Girl Meets Boy by Ali Smith. This is a book that I picked for the book club this month. This follows two sisters and it intertwines mythology and contemporary setting. I think it really asks us to question history and myth and truth and what truths matter, and can multiple truths be true at the same time. It's very short, very quick, has a queer relationship in it. And I feel like this isn't a spoiler because it's important to say that this has a happy ending for a queer relationship. And it's really important to see that represented in literature, in our medias, especially given the bury your gays and the dead lesbian trope that has become very much centered and in focus this year with The 100 and with The Walking Dead. If you haven't heard of any of that, I will leave a link to the description down below to those discussions and why it is important to see a happy ending for queer relationships. So I would highly recommend that you pick this up. I loved this. This was fantastic, and I think it's a really important read. Then I finished The Magicians by Lev Grossman. This was hard for me to get through, partly because I had been told it was Harry Potter for adults. Now, that is a really poor marketing strategy. This is not at all like Harry Potter, other than the fact that they are at a boarding school that teaches magic. It is definitely Narnia criticism. The Magician's Nephew, if you've read The Magician's Nephew, the colors yellow and green with the rings, traveling through portals into other worlds. This is a portal fantasy. This is a critique of the portal fantasy and the sort of colonial narratives that come along with portal fantasies. This is definitely challenging us to ask questions about Narnia and about the sort of discourses and ideologies that happen in the Narnia series. I've heard that this is not the greatest. I've heard that the second and third pick up. Knowing now that this is Narnia criticism, I am looking forward to going into the second and third. I'm not sure I would recommend that you read this without maybe having read The Magician's Nephew first, or at least one of the Narnia books. Like, if you haven't read them in a while, or if you haven't read them at all, get yourself back in the space and the feel and the language and the ideology in the Narnia series, and then read this. So mixed feelings about this, but I feel like maybe when I'm done the whole series, I might do a kind of wrap up discussing my thoughts on all of them together. Then for the Hobbalong, which I am woefully behind on now, I read Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the continuation of the Farseer trilogy. It's the second installment in the Farseer trilogy, and we follow Fitz in his various shenanigans. Can't really say too much without spoiling the series because it's the second book. And then I read Assassin's Quest, which is the conclusion to Fitz in the Farseer trilogy. So this was really hard for me to get through. So there's a certain pattern in Fitz's narrative, and once you realize that, it becomes really depressing to read anything that Fitz does because you know that it's not going to work out. So any sort of triumph that you see Fitz having, you know isn't going to work out because, historically speaking, it never works out. So about halfway through this one, I got stuck in the middle, and I asked you guys for help, and people sort of motivated me to keep going, which I really, really appreciated. Because in the end, when we finally get to the conclusion and the stuff that happens for the Six Duchies and for like the larger world stuffs, super interesting. I loved the conclusion of this and where I can see it branching off to. So I am planning on doing a little discussion, talking about the 3 books, and you'll be able to hear some spoilery thoughts on the series there. Then I finished Robin McKinley's The Blue Sword, which follows a girl named Harry who is an orphan who is living in the edge of society. So basically the colonialists have gone as far into the desert people's lands as possible, and then they were like, nah, the desert's kind of gross, we don't want that, you can have the desert. So they're like right on the edge of the desert, and she's living in this sort of colonial space. So the king of the desert people kidnaps Harry because his magic told him to. And then he proceeds to force her to join his ranks and become a writer and compete in this sort of asinine Hunger Games style competition. My biggest issue with this, and the reason that I just couldn't get into this, was that Harry just goes along with her kidnappers. Like, she has a life, she doesn't speak the desert people's language, she's learning a new language, and she just sort of goes with it. If you don't want to be spoiled, maybe mute the video, and then when I put my hand down, you can unpause the video. So Harry ends up marrying her kidnapper, and I couldn't buy that, I couldn't get into that, and it just bothered me that this badass girl with all of these skills that they then teach her just doesn't leave and go back to her own people. Like, how did she fall in love with her kidnapper? And why is magic, the magic told me to, an acceptable excuse to kidnap a young girl? Like, an adult man kidnapped a young girl because the magic told him to. And I found that really unacceptable. So in addition to some of the other problems that I mentioned in my Goodreads review, the racism, the sexism, the Orientalism, the colonialism, that are really not addressed in any substantial way, I had a lot of problems with this book. I didn't enjoy it. And that's maybe an unpopular opinion because I know Robin McKinley is a big name in fantasy literature, but I didn't enjoy this. Then, thanks to the encouragement of Amanda, I will leave a link to her channel down below. She's a fantastic booktuber, and I would highly recommend that you check her channel out. So Amanda motivated me to pick up Saga, which I had started and sort of lost interest in. She recommended that I keep reading because it would be worth it, and I really, really enjoyed this. I am glad that I took the time to sit down and finish reading this. I thought the artwork was great. I thought the story was interesting. I mean, it's definitely Romeo and Juliet in space, but I mean, who doesn't love Romeo and Juliet? Like, this was really good, and I'm definitely interested in picking up the next volume in the series. So thank you to Amanda for motivating me to finish this, and I will leave a link to her channel down below, and you guys should definitely check her out. I wrapped up June with Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. This is the book that I paired with Girl Meets Boy for discussion at my book club meeting. Now, this ended up working out really well. For two books that I hadn't read and sort of picked on a whim, these really dialogued well together. So while Girl Meets Boy was about a queer relationship, this is about the adultery and angst of an ungendered narrator. So we never know what the gender of the narrator is, and based on certain things the narrator does or says or wears or the people that they interact with, you catch yourself constantly questioning and trying to categorize the narrator and having to step back and check your baggage. And the experience of doing that, I mean, the sexual escapades of the narrator were kind of boring. It was almost a little too much at times. The narrator's sort of just self-centeredness and lack of awareness was occasionally annoying, but I think it's less about the story and I think more about getting us to check our baggage and the expectations that we bring to a text and sort of interrogating those expectations. Highly, highly enjoyed this. Would really recommend that you check this out. I think this works really well as a book club book. So if you want to do a buddy reads, or if you want to do something for a book club, I would definitely recommend that you pick this up because I think it benefits from talking through with other people and to see how other people interpreted things differently based on their position. So these are all the things that I read in June. I had a pretty good reading month. I had a lot of fun. I know this is a little belated now, but let me know in the comments down below what your favorite read in June was. Let me know your thoughts on any of the books that I discussed today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!